Hello everyone, how are you? I'm Ari Theriger, and today I'm going to talk about the Celtic and Germanic seasonal calendars and festivals and the importance of ritual in animistic relationships. Just a quick view on this subject, and I promise this time I'll try to make this short and straight to the point as best as possible. Besides, concerning the Norse, I won't have to, delve too much on the seasonal calendars and festivals in Northern Europe, Scandinavia, because I've already done a video about the heathen holidays in pre-Christian Scandinavia. So you can check that one for more in-depth information precisely concerning that subject. So it will be a video with just a general panorama, so to speak, so we may make some comparisons. So let's delve into it right away. And my apologies beforehand if I start to talk a lot, but there's so many things I wish to share with you, and sadly there's so little time to do it. So I may get a little bit excited and share more than previously planned. So let's look at seasonal festivals and what they consisted of, as well as the importance of ritual as a tool of communication through which a relationship can be created. Seasonal celebrations, as the name implies, were festivals that took place at specific times of the year, namely related to the movement of the sun and astronomical events, mostly solstices and equinoxes. These phenomena were also extremely relevant in the life of the European peoples of antiquity, of course, especially for the Neolithic societies, in which the activity of agriculture and pastoralism was of extreme importance in the economy, welfare, and social interactions of these peoples. For this very reason, the great majority of structures, mainly megalithic structures, that help to mark the seasonal points of great relevance in the agricultural cycle appear precisely during the Neolithic period. Of the few calendars we know before the Neolithic, they are precisely lunar calendars, because equinoxes and solstices were of little importance for societies that did not depended on agriculture, and in turn seasonal changes would not have the same impact on food sources and other resources. Since the populations before the Neolithic still had a very nomadic life, and even the first settlements were usually seasonal settlements, so the food resources for the livelihood of these peoples varied quite a lot. But with the progressive sedentary lifestyle of the populations, it also implied a technological revolution or evolution that led to the creation of spaces where food was produced and harvested, mainly through agriculture and livestock. And this type of production depends a lot on seasonal changes. But concerning this reality before the Neolithic, the same happens after the Neolithic. Especially in Southern Europe, it's more notable. We begin to see an abandonment of the megalithic phenomenon already in the Chalcolithic, the early Chalcolithic period, when societies progressively abandon the plains or the low relief areas and settle in higher areas, and agriculture is exchanged or completely changed for hunting and other means of livelihood. Because in this period, the societies progressively became more warlike, and much of the economy or the economic development is through war, conflict, looting, but also the exchange of products. But of course, all of these changes for each people, for each culture did not happen at the same time, obviously. And that is why the seasonal calendars in some cultures remained until quite late. We have the example of Neolithic peoples such as Germanic, Celts, Iberians and Celtiberian, Slavs, and of course the inhabitants of the pre-classic Mediterranean cultural world, in which the observation of the phenomenon of the sky provided not only the regulations of the calendars, but also the movements of the sun and the moon guided seasonal agricultural cycles. So the Celtic peoples, continental Germans, and Scandinavians had regular and organized rituals which allowed communication with the supernatural sphere or reality. And it helped to renew relationships with that same supernatural reality. That is, it was an important aspect for the understanding of these peoples and for the maintenance of the interaction with the other world. The same way the seasons changed and there was the necessity to accompany the renewal of the natural world and the natural changes of the world, it was also important to renew the relationships with the natural world. We must not forget that these societies, in religious terms, were animistic, and even the conception of the divine, the gods, was not yet structured in the way that we know today or are more familiar with in mythologies written in later periods by people who were already culturally, linguistically, and even religiously disconnected from the religious conceptions and systems of belief of the past. Not only pre-Christian systems of belief, but especially pre-classic animistic systems of belief. For this very reason, in an animistic world or worldview, the interaction with the world around us and the supernatural forces that govern and interact with natural forces and with the human beings, it was important to maintain this connection, maintain a balance of sorts, build a beneficial relationship with the non-human entities or beings for the well-being of the general community, the community as a whole, the community of life. So seasonal celebrations help to consolidate these relationships and to renew these relationships. The festive dates, therefore, included some practices such as, for instance, consecration of alcoholic beverages through the fermentation of various products. And such beverages were dedicated to the most important gods and spirits. There was also the performance of animal sacrifices related to the deities, not only from, let's say, a pantheon of official cult, but also the other local deities and other entities of place, especially spirits of weather, of the grain, and of the soils that would help in the production in specific places. So through a symbiotic relationship with such entities, it required the offering of something to renew the relationship with such entities to keep having support in the next cycle of food production. It was also customary to offer loot collected in battles, of course, and the sacrifice of animals considered to be sacred to some deities, sacrifice of part of the harvest, and other foods and objects for both divine and supernatural entities in general as a way of thanking them. And perhaps this is one of the main reasons why there are so many Roman artifacts in Denmark, even though, as you know, Denmark was never an area controlled by the Romans, but a large number of Roman artifacts, especially coins, were purposely deposited in swamps and bogs in Denmark in an act of offering, sacrifice of important objects acquired not only in plunder, but also by trade with the peoples of the Mediterranean, which then led precisely to the development of runic writing systems among Germanic peoples due to the contact with the peoples of the Mediterranean and the Iberian Atlantic. So Denmark shows us a good example of sacrificing important objects in order to renew relationships with the supernatural for the benefit of the human community. Perhaps for a better understanding of the animistic mentality of these peoples and what led them to the practice of these celebrations, it will be good to mention other ritualistic practices that could also be performed in these times of seasonal celebration, but also seasonal change, such as the rituals of sacrifice, on very special occasions, of course, sometimes due to a bad harvest year. It was assumed that it was due to a lack of sacrifice or failing to do the correct sacrifice, and then something extremely special was sacrificed. That is, a life was sacrificed in exchange for renewing the relationship with the entities and forces that provided good harvests, but also rituals in the arrival to some sacred place, making a change of reality and entering another space. Rituals in the preparations of, or in the preparations to move to a new place, and rituals upon settling in that place. Rituals due to victory in battles, rituals due to the death of chieftains and kings. So mainly ritual applied in moments of change, great change, in breaking of cycles, and the ritual to allow the continuation of life in the new cycles. Therefore, rituals are symbiotic, or rather, symbolic representations. They are moments through which human beings and supernatural deities and entities can meet, and therefore rituals are essential elements for the communication process between the two realities, and to obtain greater effectiveness in life, in everyday life. That is why the ritual presents precisely the attempt to build, maintain, and renew all the relationships on which humans depended for survival. This is the basis of paganism, the celebration of life and the celebration of moments of change, because pagans believed that humans were part of the community of life. So the rituals were not aimed at entities who transcended the cycles of life, but instead aimed at the beings who, like humans, lived within these cycles of life and depended on these same cycles. So every moment of change, individually or collectively, was reason to perform ritual, not solely as a religious act, but as a responsibility towards those involved in the cyclical change, and that might directly or indirectly be affected by the change. So ritual is necessary to maintain and strengthen relationships, which of course leads to the celebrations of cyclical moments of great change, a change that causes a greater impact on the entire natural community, the community of life. And such changes as the seasonal changes of great importance, such as winter and summer, for instance. But of course, the changes of sky phenomenon as well. That is why I warned previously of the difference between animistic worldviews and mythological concepts, because in reality, mythology does not create rituals, but it is the rituals that create mythology. Therefore, the ritual is related to the phenomenon of communication as a tool to get in contact with the other world, the supernatural. Hence, the ritual most likely precedes the myth, because the myth is a cultural code that has the function to explain the ritual. And then it forms a flexible structure that constantly adapts to ritual changes. So even the myth, if the myth is constantly changing, it usually follows a structure that allows understanding. And that is why the conception of the divine, or of the gods, always follows the same standards or the same pattern. But the ritual is more versatile and more subject to major changes, because it is the form of communication that always seeks to establish an attempt to manipulate the entities of the other world. Because human beings need the intercession of these beings or these deities to obtain something from them, such as good weather, good harvests, etc. Mythology only creates communication between the human beings to understand the ritual. But the ritual, on the other hand, creates communication with the supernatural, between the human being and the supernatural. Mythology does not change any relationship and does not bring real benefits to the community, but the ritual changes relationships and provides benefits, precisely because it is pragmatic and not static or theoretical like the myth, which is why many neo-pagan religious manifestations fail in reconstructing paganisms, not only because animism is often neglected, but also because such neo-pagan religious manifestations or reconstructions rely upon mythology more than in ritual, rely on theoretical explanations of ritual rather than dealing with things sensibly and realistically in a way that is based on practical relationship through ritual. Now that we have established the importance of building relationships with the supernatural through ritual, let's move on to the main annual Celtic and Germanic seasonal celebrations, which by themselves represent an extended ritual towards cyclical forces and entities. And such celebrations aim to renew relationships and strengthen the bonds between the human community and the entities of the natural world, the community of the natural world. The festivals were ritualistic moments that had been held since before the formal use of calendars, and for this very reason, as such festivals followed astronomical events, changes in seasons, and also lunar cycles, there is no certainty in terms of specific dates and months of certain festivals because, as I said, they were ritualistic festivals already performed before the formal use of calendars. Even so, we know that the Celts of Gaul made a calendar, the one called the Coligny calendar, with dates that go back to the Bronze Age. It depicts 5 solar years of 12 months, with 2 additional months to adapt to the lunar year together with the solar one. Before the use of the calendar, the annual celebrations were important moments for farmers, hunters, fishermen, shepherds, you name it. Anyone else who depended very much on the land and the changes provoked by the passing of the seasons. The Celts and Germanic peoples used the, let's say, half-year orientation as a basic unit of time, dividing the year into moments, right? Sort of 2 very long seasons with no real distinction of seasons between summer and winter. In Iceland, as an example, this division into was precisely summer and winter. No real conception of spring and autumn or fall. Each of these seasons were more or less 26 weeks long, and at the beginning of each season, it was marked by a feast and a religious ritual. However, the passage of time was counted by winters and the nights and phases of the moon in Northern Europe. So it wasn't really how many days had passed, but how many nights and months were counted by the phases of the moon, and the years were counted by the amount of winters that had passed. This, of course, in the most basic understanding. However, in relation to the solar year, the Celts had 3 significant festivals: Samhain, Beltane, and Lughnasadh. There was a 4th annual festival or celebration called Imbolc. However, it has not been considered of great importance or having been of significant importance by academics, as there are only very, very few documentations and other sources in which the name of this festival appears, Imbolc. There are many more documents in relation to the other 3 that I've mentioned, and that is why it seems that the annual Celtic celebrations of great importance would have been a total of 3, which also actually coincides with the 3 most important celebrations in pre-Christian Scandinavia. Speaking of the Celts, the first festive date of the year would be more or less around our 1st of November, right? Known as Samhain, although in neo-paganism it has been celebrated on the 31st of October. Again, the dates are not really specific because they were celebrations before the official use of calendars, but one day ahead or one day before, actually a couple of hours in between, well, it matters little. The important thing here is to know that this celebration was specifically the most important for the Celtic peoples. It marked the beginning of winter and the beginning of the year, a whole new year. And at the same time, it was a recap of summer, since there was no idea of a season between summer and winter. So it is the moment when summer is repeated, so to speak, just for a little moment, before winter really arrives. Samhain probably meant the end of summer precisely, even though it was the official beginning of winter for the Celts of antiquity and also the beginning of the year. This is also when the summer ends and there is a little recap of summer until it is gone for good and starts the beginning of the year by entering in winter. At that time, animal sacrifices took place that would not withstand winter, or in other words, animals that could not be kept outdoors during winter were killed. This festival or this celebration was considered as a period of danger, as it represented precisely the threshold between the seasons, right, summer and winter, but also the threshold between the world of the living and the other world, which at this time of the year was believed to be opened, the other world being opened to ours, so to speak. And the dead could meet the living once again. So it was a dangerous moment, which is quite interesting, actually, this belief, because in terms of animistic mentality, the relationships created between human beings and other entities, especially entities from the natural world and the forces of nature, but also the ancestral dead, were relationships with the objective of preventing some kind of damage from supernatural entities or the ancestral dead even. So a celebratory ritual was important to protect the human community, protect from harm, illness, all sorts of diseases and even death. This is actually a belief very present in the pagan mentality, paganism being a sort of branch from animism and therefore being highly pragmatic. It is the involvement in life and acknowledging life within the world, but knowing full well that life in the world and contact with the world can be tough, dangerous, and extremely cruel at times. So instead of ignoring that reality and acknowledging the full involvement in the world, these celebrations served to seek ways through ritual to work on resolutions and minimize harm and all sorts of damage. Hence the need to build relationships and renew relationships, lest the entities of the natural world forget the previous bonds that had been created before the end of a cycle. Another important festival was Beltane, which in certain places marked the date of the great Druidic assemblies celebrated on May the 1st, understood as the beginning of the summer. That date had as the main characteristic the importance that was given to the element of fire, building big or great bonfires. Fires were lit in that celebration, and for this same reason, other smaller celebrations after this period throughout the rest of the summer until the arrival of winter once again. And still today, there are still many celebrations involving fire, building great bonfires. Many of these celebrations, of course, having been Christianized and eventually related to some saints. Therefore, even after the consolidation of Christianity, the practices of lighting fires and various other fertility rites continued, with the aim of obtaining a good harvest and protection. There were also two other festivals, one held around the 1st of February, Imbolc, and another on the 1st of August, Lughnasadh. Imbolc is also considered an important festival, but there are only a few documents in which the name appears, as has already been said before. So perhaps it is more important today among neo-pagans than among Celtic pagans in general of the past. Celebrated in February, it was associated with the goddess Bridget, popularly known after the Christian consolidation as Saint Bridget. The goddess Bridget was very important for the pre-Christian peoples of what is nowadays Ireland and also Portugal. And perhaps a fact that many are not aware of is that, as I said, after Christianization, this celebration was related to the Saint Bridget, a real person, still celebrated nowadays during this very season. And perhaps what most people don't know is that the head of Saint Bridget is in nowadays Portugal. For many years, many centuries actually, her remains went to and fro between Portugal and Ireland on religious processions. And since the 16th century, her head finally remained in Portugal for good to this day, on a church that I've actually visited a few years back before I created a YouTube channel. The head was shown to me. It was a skull, and it's such a pity I didn't take a photo to show you. Anyway, the goddess Bridget, her name indicates a connection to the action of milking, but she also has a strong association with purification, a goddess not only of fertility, of course, but also related to the land and domestication of animals, healing and protection. But in this video today, it's not to develop around this goddess. Well, as it was said, in August, the celebration of Lughnasadh, which had the meaning related to the harvests, and in pre-Christian periods, it was connected to the Celtic god Llw. Another fun fact, the god Llw is also one of the more than 3,000 worshipped deities in the Iberian Peninsula, both in what is nowadays Portugal and Spain. And today it still has great weight in the Iberian religions. And it is not only due to the growth of neo-paganisms and neo-pagan reconstructions of Celtic religious manifestations, but actually the god Llw was a highly venerated deity in pre-Roman Iberian Peninsula. The god Llw is a pan-Celtic deity, meaning evidences of his cult has been found in virtually all regions of Celtic roots, including the Iberian Peninsula, of course. But about the god Llw in the Iberian Peninsula will be for another time or another video. About Nordic and Germanic seasonal festivals, I will not delve too much on it in this video because I have already done that on another video that I will leave on the description of this video, down below on the description, and as well as at the end of this very video. But I say Germanic and Nordic in here because it is necessary to make a separation here, because much differs between the mainland Germanic peoples, the old Germans, and the Scandinavian peoples, mainly before the migration period, but also during the medieval Nordic period, the early Nordic Middle Ages. Winter for the Germanic peoples started in what we would call autumn today, with the celebration of winter nights in October, around October, and in Iceland possibly between the 11th and the 18th of October. However, due to difficulties and a lot of limitations on the sources, it is unknown an exact date for the celebration of that festival, the winter nights. Also, to the Germanic peoples of the Iron Age, they had a different understanding of the season. For them, the year was divided into 3 seasons: winter, spring, and summer. Autumn, therefore, was an unknown season in their reality. In April, the equivalent of summer was celebrated as Sumarmol, probably between the 9th to the 15th of April. In the Viking era, this was the time to ask for good luck, and in the invasions and expeditions after the period at winter, when being indoors finally came to an end, and celebration that in the sources was also known as Siðr, the sacrifice for victory. There was also the midwinter celebration known as Yule, which afterwards, with the advent of Christianity, became resignified as Christmas and was an extremely widespread celebration all over Northern Europe, but already as a Christian celebration until the present day. I've already talked about Yule on the video entitled Heathen Holidays. The pre-Christian Yule, or to be more precise, the pre-10th century Yule, when Haakon I of Norway, the third king of Norway and ruling in the 10th century of the Common Era, was trying to force the heathens into Christianity. So it was he, King Haakon, who moved Yule to the same date as Christmas, which was then held on the solstice on the Julian calendar. But before this change, Yule did not have a fixed date and shifted every year. It was celebrated after 3 full moons, after 3 moon cycles, after the harvest moon, of course, and after the winter solstice. And then, with King Haakon, Yule became the moment when the winter solstice took place. Mind that Christmas was on the solstice until the Julian calendar was rectified by the Gregorian calendar 6 centuries after Haakon's time in the 16th century. So only then was Yule shifted again, but to the 25th of December. So pre-Christian and pre-Haakon Yule in Scandinavia had no fixed date whatsoever and depended very much on the moon cycles. And then, still in the Viking period, late Viking period, it was shifted to winter solstice. But I delve into this subject in more depth on the other video I've mentioned. Later on, already in the 13th century, Snorre Sturluson in the Ynglinga saga mentions 3 main festivals in Scandinavia, supposedly before the Christian conversion. One in the beginning of winter, when there were many sacrifices, one for midwinter, for plantation growth, and one for summer, for success and victory in expeditions. For winter, that is in our modern day conception of autumn, a Blót was made, a sacrifice for prosperity. On midwinter, a sacrifice for the growth of all things planted in the soils. In summer, a third one, which would be the victory Blót, Siðr Blót, Sumarmal. The autumn celebration or ceremony would take place after the last harvest, and the slaughtered animals would be those that were not supposed to survive the winter. The midwinter Blót would occur after the longest nights were over, and then the rebirth of the land would be celebrated. The summer ceremony celebration of victory would coincide with the departure of ships, signaling the beginning of the invasions, but also the beginning of trading and exploration voyages. But for more information on these celebrations, check the other video I have mentioned, please. Now, since only a few ever reach the end of my videos, I'll take the opportunity to leave a message in relation to the importance of relationships built with the entities of the world, be those supernatural, divine, or otherwise. Ritual was, and indeed it still is, important within animistic and pagan societies. And the yearly celebrations were an extended and bigger ritualized celebration in order to build, maintain, and renew relationships. I said before that many neo-pagan religious movements nowadays fail in pagan religious reconstructions. Perhaps I was a little bit too harsh. We are all trying our best, but that is no less true. The fact that animism is often neglected in neo-pagan religious manifestations and also mythologies are the bigger focus, the animistic pagan mentality wasn't yet incorporated in almost all neo-pagan religions, organizations, and movements, which make these new age religions and religious movements more of the same and not at all paganisms, which is why we still see a lot of Abrahamic religious understandings in modern paganisms, and this isn't good because neo-pagans will eventually get tired of seeing more of the same and eventually move away from modern paganisms. But that isn't the point of all of this talk. The point is that, indeed, most neo-pagan religious organizations focus too much on the gods, focus too much on mythologies as guidelines for religion, when in fact, as said before, mythologies are theoretical explanations of ritual and other cultural animistic interactions and relationships built through practical actions. In other words, most neo-pagans worship gods through prayer, as if addressing the Abrahamic God, instead of being pragmatic about it and build relationships with their surroundings, not just the natural world, but the very place in which they inhabit and the entities that share space with us. But there's a bigger problem than this, because how can people build relationships with such entities if they can't even build relationships with other peoples that are immediately perceptible in our lives? Many people fervently want to build relationships with gods, fairies, extraterrestrial entities, ancestors, and so on and so forth. But if they cannot even build relationships with other people of the world, how can they expect to build relationships with entities other than human? So this is just my advice. First, build relationships with people, be those human or animal or otherwise. Build relationships with the persons that are immediately perceptible in the world, because if by any chance you cannot build a relationship with those similar to us and those more in line with our reality, and even failing at building a relationship with the land itself, how can people expect to build a relationship with entities beyond what is familiar? For instance, we still have people who are racists, and they cannot accept another person simply by the color or the shade of their skin. The color of their skin, such a trivial thing. Others are homophobic, and they cannot accept another person or indeed build any relationship with that person solely based on who that person loves, not accepting people by whom they love. So, if people cannot even accept skin color and cannot even accept people by the expressions of affection and love they display, how can they expect to accept and even create relationships with entities far more complex than physical appearance and emotion? Building a relationship with the persons of the world, the persons that are immediately perceptible, I think it is the first great step into being ready to build relationships beyond that. Animism is the core of pagan systems of belief. Building relationships with the world that surrounds us, with the wider home we live in, and not seeking what's beyond it. If you haven't even yet accepted humans, or even haven't yet accepted the place of your very existence. If you cannot accept this and this, how can you possibly begin to build a relationship with what lies within and beyond? Something to think about. Right, my dear friends, thank you so much for watching. See you on the next video. And as always, thanks for today. Obrigado por hoje. Tá, querida?